Okay, this is lecture 6, and today we'll be talking about the integumentary system. This is the last lecture of the audio formatted lectures. The rest will be regular in-class lectures, and this will also be the last lecture included on your first exam. So the integumentary system, we're basically talking about the skin and the components of the skin. In its job, it serves as a protective coat. It is composed of skin and also its appendages. So this includes sweat glands, oil glands, hair, and also nails as well. Some of the functions of the integumentary system, there are 5 of them. The first function is protection. The skin cushions and insulates deeper body organs against chemicals, microorganisms, helps to waterproof the skin, and also protects us from UV radiation. So I'll say that again. Number 1 is protection. The skin cushions and insulates the organs of the body. Also protects us against chemicals, microorganisms, protects us from UV radiation, and also serves as a waterproof coat. The second function of the integumentary system is body temperature regulation. So the skin can do this in 2 different ways. The skin contains sweat glands, which will help us for heat loss. So we can dissipate heat through the release of sweat on our skin surface, and that will allow us to release that heat into the ambient environment. The other option with the skin is we have some capillaries, and so in a cold environment, we can conserve heat by constricting these capillaries. So basically, the blood serves as an excellent medium for the transportation of heat. And so if we keep the blood at the core surface or within our core, then we can maintain that level of heat, right? So body temperature regulation through sweat glands, and also through constricting our capillaries within the skin, which will help us to keep our heat within the core or within the middle of your body. Function number 3 is excretion. So the integumentary system is going to help us excrete urea, salts, and water, and we're going to secrete these through our sweat. And one interesting thing is our sweat actually contains the same components or the same waste products that we get rid of in our urine. It's just obviously in a little lesser concentration, but that's kind of an interesting thing to think about. Number 4, production of vitamin D. So vitamin D is the only vitamin or mineral that we can make endogenously. And what endogenously means is we can make it within ourselves. And the way we do that is through the stimulation of UV rays. So the sunlight against our skin surface causes us to synthesize or create vitamin D, which is an essential vitamin within our body. And again, like I said, the unique thing about vitamin D is it's the only vitamin that we can create within ourselves for endogenously. Function number 5, the integumentary system also helps us with sensory reception. And the integumentary system contains sensory receptors that allow us to sense changes in pressure, changes in temperature, and also it can help us to perceive pain as well. So it's got pain receptors as well. Okay, if we want to take a look at the different layers of the integumentary system, we really have 3 major layers. We have an epidermis. Epi means upon, so the epidermis lies upon the top, basically. It's the most superficial layer, and it's made of, if you remember back to our tissues lecture, it's made of a stratified squamous epithelium. Okay, so it's made of several layers of smushed down cells, pretty much. Okay, the dermis is the middle layer, and it's made of mostly connective tissue. And again, if you remember back to our tissues lecture, we know that connective tissue's job is to help us connect things. So the connective tissue layer in the dermis is going to help bind the skin to the entire body. So it binds the entire body together, pretty much. Underneath the dermis, we have the hypodermis. Hypo means below, so the hypodermis lies below the dermis. And this is a fatty layer, also called superficial fascia or a subcutaneous layer. And it's mostly made up of adipose tissue or fat. And if you've ever had your skin fold measured, in terms of body composition, basically one of the methods we can use to measure your body fat percentage is called skin fold, and basically you pinch the skin surface to see how much fat is stored within the hypodermis. So if any of you have ever had that done, whether it's through sports or through some health or fitness club or something like that, skin fold measurements are a common way for us to measure body fat. And basically what we're doing when we measure the skin fold is measuring how thick the hypodermis layer is. And that would give us a good idea in terms of what your overall percentage of body fat is within your body. Underneath the hypodermis, we also have a deep fascia layer, and then under that deep fascia layer, which is made of connective tissue, our muscles will lie underneath of that. Okay. So if we want to delve into a little more detail in terms of what is contained within the epidermis, like we just mentioned, it's made of stratified squamous epithelial cells, and there are actually several layers within. So we have the stratum basale, which is the most bottom layer or the most base layer, stratum spinosum, stratum granulosum, stratum lucidum, and stratum corneum. And we'll talk about each of these in a little bit of detail. Again, epidermis contains 5 layers. The variation of thickness of these 5 layers determines whether our skin is thick or thin. And if you think about areas of high amounts of friction within your body, those are going to be areas where we have thicker skin. And again, that's going to help us to increase the amount of protection that we can provide at that particular location. So, for example, your hands and your feet are going to have thicker skin in comparison to, for example, the skin that covers your abdominal area. And the reason for that is your hands and feet have a lot of friction. They have a lot of interaction. And so, therefore, they're at a higher risk for harm. So it's important for us to have thicker layers of skin here in terms of protection. Within the epidermis, we have keratinocytes, and site tells us that we're talking about a cell. And a keratinocyte is the most abundant type of epidermal cell. And basically what it does is it produces keratin, which the job of keratin is to help us protect the epidermis. And we'll talk in a little more detail coming up about what the keratinocytes actually do. But again, they are going to produce keratin, which is basically going to help us in terms of protection of the epidermis. So in terms of reproduction, the stratum layers of the epidermis reproduce very quickly. Our skin is one of the most active or quickly reproducing organs within the body. And basically what happens is the cells that are produced at the stratum basale, or that bottom layer, are going to push their way up to the skin surface. So those layers at the bottom are where cells are going to reproduce, and then they'll continue to push upward or towards towards the outside world as they age. And then our dead skin cells are going to rub off from the superficial layer, which we said was the stratum corneum. And the epidermis is basically replaced every 34 to 45 days. So again, we're constantly replacing these cells, very, very active metabolic type of tissue. And again, you can understand this from a functional perspective, and the fact that if their job is protection, we need to make sure these cells are constantly able to complete that. So we need to make sure these cells are constantly healthy, because they're constantly coming in contact with not only the outside world, but also friction types of surfaces, which would require them to be very strong in nature. Okay, so let's talk about each of these layers separately. We'll start with the stratum basale. Again, we said this was the deepest layer, or base layer of the epidermis. So it's going to connect us directly to the dermis itself. Also known as the germinating layer as well. And I'm not sure which your textbook refers to it. I believe your textbook refers to this layer as the basale. And this, in terms of the details of this layer, or this stratum, it's a single row of keratinocytes that are going to, again, divide very rapidly. We've got Merkel cells within this layer, and they are going to contain sensory receptors. So these are going to help us to sense changes in touch, or sense the sensation of touch, basically. And these Merkel cells are going to be highly concentrated in areas where we need a lot of detail about our touch. So, for example, in your fingertips, on your lips, for example, those are going to be areas of high concentration of these Merkel cells because we have a higher perception of touch in these particular areas. Areas of low Merkel cell concentration, we could say, like the back of your neck, for example, or the back of your arm, your tricep. We don't have a lot of, or as detailed of sensation in those particular areas. We also have melanocytes, and melanocytes are going to create melanin, which is our skin pigment, and our skin pigment is going to help us to block UV rays. And in light-skinned people, most of the melanin is digested before it reaches the skin surface, and again, that's why our skin looks light in nature, and this is the reason why we need to wear sunscreen, so that it could help us in a greater amount to protect us from these UV rays. In dark-skinned people, melanin is not digested, and therefore it occupies the layers of the epidermis. And again, the occupation of the melanin in these particular layers is what gives you a darker tone of your skin. Melanocytes respond to UV rays and increase production with an increase in darkness of skin. So again, that's one of the reasons why we get tan in the summer, because we're increasing the production level of these melanocytes in comparison to in the winter where we're maybe not in those UV rays, and so therefore we don't need that level of protection. Okay, the stratum spinosum is known as the spiny layer, so spinosum, spiny, and this layer contains several layers of cells. And like I said, it gets its name from its spine-like extensions of the keratinocytes, and contains dendritic cells. And these dendritic cells are kind of star-shaped, and their job is to help with immune function. And so again, we said one of the goals or one of the functions of the integumentary system was protection. And so it's important for us to have some level of immune function within this tissue, and so that's really the job of the stratum spinosum. So again, what's going on in this layer? We've got spiny types of cells that are going to have spine-like extensions, and we also have dendritic cells, which are going to serve as an immune function within this layer. And again, this is the second layer. It's next in line, right above the stratum basale. Okay. Again, here you can see the relationship. This is a histological slide where you can see the relationship between those 5 layers. So again, you can see kind of in the lighter color down here, we've got the dermis layer, which again we said was a connective tissue layer. Stratum basale, again, a single layer of cells, and that's where the cells of the epidermis are going to be reproduced. And stratum spinosum, again, spine-like cells within this area, and they also are going to serve as an immune function as well. Okay, so moving on to the stratum granulosum, and again, this layer is going to lie directly above the spinosum, and this is made of a granular layer, consists of 1 to 5 layers of flattened cells. Again, our thicker skin would contain more layers within the stratum granulosum in comparison to thinner areas of skin. Our cells contain 2 different types of granules, lamellated granules and keratohyalin granules. The lamellated granules contain a waterproofing agent that's called a glycolipid. So this component, or this waterproofing agent, is made up of both sugar and fats. And if you put like a oil in a water, it can help to, the oil will kind of separate itself. So fatty things don't like to be in water. They're called hydrophobic in nature. They're water fearing. And so they're going to help us with being waterproof because of that fatty component is going to help to kind of shield off the water and help us to be waterproofing. Also helps us to prevent water loss through the skin surface. So not only are we keeping water out, we're also keeping fluids in as well with these granules. Okay. The keratohyalin granules are going to help us to form keratin. Okay. Again, this just shows you a different histological slide, a different look at those 5 layers within the epidermis. Again, stratum basale, you can see the most base layer. Stratum spinosum, you can see supposedly is spiny in nature. It kind of just looks like little dots in this particular image. And then the stratum granulosum, this is actually the last living layer of epidermal cells. Okay. And again, we know that the importance with this layer is it's going to provide us with granules that are important for waterproofing. And again, that involves keeping water out and also keeping water in. Okay. Stratum lucidum. This occurs within thick skin. Again, where do we have thick skin? We've kind of already mentioned this so far today, but these are going to be areas of high friction, high amount of traffic. So your hands, for example, the soles of your feet would be very high in friction for you. Those are areas where we've got thicker skin. This layer is named as the transition zone. We've got rows of flat, dead keratinocytes. So again, like we said, the granulosum was the last living layer of cells. And so this is kind of like our first layer or first several layers of these dead cells or these dead keratinocytes. Okay. Stratum corneum, this is the most external portion of the epidermis. And again, this layer can vary in thickness, much thicker in thick skin. Obviously, we want more layers of cells, more protection in areas of higher traffic. This contains dead keratinocytes that are flat and they're completely full of keratin. And again, that's going to give us our different skin tones, or it's going to help us with determining our different skin tones. But again, its major job is waterproof agent. This layer helps us to protect the skin from abrasion and penetration. Also helps with waterproofing with that glycolipid that we talked about. And these cells are shed on a regular basis. So we're constantly losing cells. These cells are sloughing off the top of your skin pretty much all the time. I want to say it's like 80% of the dust in your house is made up of these cells actually. When these slough off of you, they go everywhere. And all different places, all throughout your house, in your car, in your clothes, everywhere else. And the average person, this just is crazy to me, the average person sheds 40 pounds of skin flakes in a lifetime. That is nuts. Okay, now let's move down. Now we're going to be talking about the dermis, and the dermis is going to lie deep or underneath of the epidermis, and this is composed of strong and flexible connective tissue. Again, the job of connective tissue is going to be to help to connect the epidermis, keep it kind of bound down to the rest of the body. So it helps to keep things connected. Contains a lot of things. The dermis is kind of got a lot of things going on within it. So we have fibroblasts, and again, we know blast cells are important for building. So these fibroblasts are going to help us to build different types of fibers. Macrophages, so macrophages are little immune cells that are going to help us to eat up any waste products or any bad guys. Mast cells, we've got white blood cells, which again will help us with immune function. And lastly, we have 3 different types of fibers. And we've talked about these three fibers before in the tissues lecture. So we have elastic, collagen, and reticular fibers. Okay. The dermis is richly supplied with nerve fibers and blood vessels. The blood vessels have two functions. The blood vessels are going to supply nutrients to the dermis and epidermis because the epidermis actually contains no blood vessels or no blood supply. So it's the job of the dermis to make sure that it's getting the nutrients and oxygen and things that it needs. And the second function of our blood vessels is temperature regulation. And again, we talked about in a cold environment, we want to constrict blood flow to this particular area, and that will allow us to conserve our heat within our core. Okay, so functions of the blood vessels: number one, supply nutrients to the dermis and epidermis, and number two, it's critical for temperature regulation. The dermis contains two layers. We have a papillary layer, which is about 20%, and this contains dermal papillae, and papillae are finger-like projections. Okay, so this is the most superficial of the two dermis layers, and the papillae are going to kind of project into the epidermis. And again, the purpose of this is to help us to provide blood and nerves to reach different portions within the epidermis itself. Because, like we said, the epidermis is an avascular layer, or there's no blood or nerve supply here. The reticular layer is 80% of the dermis, and this is made of dense, irregular connective tissue. And this contains thick bundles of collagen and elastic fibers. And this helps to give the skin its strength and resilience. And elastic fibers are going to give us stretch and recoil. Again, our skin is a unique organ because we need it to be strong so it won't tear or have scabs, and it can withstand a lot of different things that we put it through. But yet we need it to be stretchy. So we've got these elastic fibers that are going to give us this stretch and recoil. That's important for us in terms of muscle contraction and also growth. So as you gain weight, we need our skin to be able to stretch to receive that particular amount of weight. And as you lose weight, we want our skin to stretch back so that, it's still tight in nature. Dermal tearing can result of extreme stretching. So if you gain a lot of weight very quickly, we can have some level of dermal tearing, and this is going to create white scars that are streak-like in nature, and that's what stretch marks are. So stretch marks basically, the skin wasn't stretchy enough to receive the amount of rapid weight change that you had, or the rapid amount of stress that you had in this particular area, and so therefore we've got some dermal tearing, and so then you get these little white scars, which we call stretch marks. Okay, moving on to the hypodermis. Again, hypo means below, so the hypodermis is going to lie underneath of the dermis. This is our fatty layer. Again, we also would call it the subcutaneous layer. It contains really two things. It contains adipose tissue. That's the main thing it contains, and that's just fat cells. It stores fat for us, which is going to help us with insulation and also can serve as a reserve for fuel. And it also has areolar tissue. Okay. So this layer helps to anchor the skin to underlying layers. And again, like I said, can also serve as an insulator with our fat cells stored here. And the hypodermis can thicken during weight gain, particularly in hips and thighs for females and within the abdominal area for males. So again, this is the layer that we most commonly see weight gain in terms of fat. Okay. In terms of skin color, there are three pigments that are going to contribute to skin color. The first is melanin, and this is the most important of the three pigments. We also have carotene, which is a yellow-orange pigment that we get from food, and this is going to accumulate within the stratum corneum. And then the last pigment is hemoglobin, And hemoglobin is the pink hue of white skin due to oxygenated levels of hemoglobin. So basically what hemoglobin is it's a component of the red blood cells, and it helps us to carry oxygen, and it is red in nature when it is oxygenated. And you can see this underneath your skin surface, particularly if you have light skin. It gives us a flushed appearance. So if any of you get like red in your face or anything when you exercise, or maybe when you're, in a hot environment, if your face gets flushed, or if you get embarrassed and your face gets red, what's going on is the hemoglobin is seen underneath your skin surface. So you have blood kind of rushing to your skin surface, and this is the hemoglobin peeking through and gives you that kind of pink appearance. The reasons for variations in skin color is not fully understood. We know, there are lots of different shades you can be. You can be very white, you can be very black, you can have a yellow tint of skin, you can have a more red hue to your skin, more brown. I mean, there are lots of different colors of skin, which is awesome. And the reasons for these variations in our skin color is not fully understood. Most likely, we think it's genetic based, on original origin and proximity to either the equator or sunny environments. So, for example, if you live close to the equator, your skin would need to be very dark, because that will protect you from UV rays. And again, this would probably have to do with a little bit of survival of the fittest, but probably more something that can change over time, over the years. So like I said, people living close to the equator more likely to have dark skin, because they're going to survive better in that particular type of environment where they can protect themselves from the UV rays. People that live in the northern hemisphere, like Boston, Canada, Norway, those types of people, they're going to be more likely to be fair skinned. And they're also most likely to be vitamin D deficient at least half of the year. So those of us who live in northern areas, like Dubuque, Iowa, we have winter, obviously, unfortunately. And so we're vitamin D deficient at least half of the year because we're not spending a large amount of time out in the sun when it's -20 out. Or most of us aren't. I know I'm not. So we do become vitamin D deficient in the winter months, and we're usually more fair-skinned. And again, like I said, those that live close to the equator or those in the southern hemisphere are generally darker skinned. And again, this is an evolutionary thing that's probably changed as people can travel and move to different countries and different locations, and now we're kind of all interspersed. But initially, that's the thought in terms of where our skin color actually came from. Okay. So more about melanin. Melanin ranges from yellowish to reddish to brown to black. So again, there are a lot of different tones of skin color. And skin color is a result of the amount and type of melanin that we produce. Within the skin, we also have several different accessory organs and items. So we'll talk in just a little bit of detail about the nails, hair follicles, sebaceous glands, and also our sweat glands. These are all things that are components of the epidermis but extend into the dermis of the skin. Okay, so let's start by talking about the nails. And our nails are made of dead keratinized cells, and hard keratin predominates in the hair and nails, while we have soft keratin that dominates in the skin. So there are really, I guess, two different types of keratin that we have. And again, within the hair and skins, we've got kind of a harder amount of keratin, and that's going to help to give our nails that the hard texture. So hard keratin is not flaky, and it's tougher and more durable, which makes sense if you think about what your nails are like. Your nails look pink because of the capillaries that are underlying within the dermis. And two components of the nails that we want to point out: the nail matrix. This is the active growing part of the nail. And then we have the lunelle, which is the moon-shaped portion. It's the white portion that's thick, and we cannot see the dermis underneath here. Okay. Within the hair covers our entire body, with the exception of palms and soles of our feet, and also our external genitals. And this serves, in many situations, to keep mammals warm, and helps us to sense things that lightly touch the skin surface. So again, two pretty important roles for us, keeping bodies warm, again, not necessarily for us as humans, but definitely as other mammals, and also to sense things that lightly touch our skin surface. So we know that, you can feel something on your arm, even if it doesn't actually touch your skin, but maybe brushes against your the hair on your arms. Eyelashes and nose hairs, again, are going to help to protect us. The nose hairs are going to help to collect any type of foreign objects that we wouldn't want to enter into our respiratory tract. And our eyelashes, again, are going to help us to keep foreign objects or foreign items out of our eyes. Our hair contains both a root and a shaft. The root part is embedded into the skin, and the shaft is going to project above the skin surface. Okay. If we are to look at the hair itself in a little more detail, it really contains three different parts. We have the medulla, which you can see. Sorry, my picture's a little bit blurry here. The medulla is the central core portion, so it's the most internal portion of the hair itself. And then we have the cortex, which surrounds the medulla, and this contains several layers of flattened cells. And then the cuticle is the single outermost layer. And conditioners are basically the job of, like when you put conditioner in your hair, is to help to smooth out this layer and to make it shiny. The hair color that you have is determined by melanocytes made at the base of each hair follicle. Okay, so again, medulla is the most inner layer, cortex is like the middle layer, and then the cuticle is a single outermost layer. And again, the hair color that you have is determined by the melanocytes that are at the base of your hair follicle. Okay, so in terms of hair follicles, the cavity, this is the cavity for which our hair grows, and two different components here. We have a hair bulb, which is a knot of sensory nerve endings that wrap around the hair particle, and this allows the hair to serve as an excellent sensory receptor, basically. Again, like we said, you can feel something that's not even really touching you if it brushes against your hair like on your arm, for example. And this hair bulb helps us to kind of amplify that reception, and so it allows our hair to serve as a very an excellent, we could say, an excellent way for us to receive senses. We also have erector pili, and this is a bundle of smooth muscle cells. When the erector pili is relaxed, the hair lies flat, and when the erector pili contracts, this is what allows our hair to stand up on end, and this also gives us goosebumps, the contraction of the erector pili. In terms of hair thinning and baldness, like we said, the melanin within your hair itself will determine the color of your hair. And this can definitely change with aging. So people that have like white or gray hair, they've stopped producing melanin within the hair follicles themselves. Also, by the age of 60 to 65, most men and women have experienced at least some level of hair thinning, and male pattern baldness is genetically determined. Obviously, gender influence, we see this in male and not quite so much in female. And basically what happens is hair never emerges from the follicle, and treatments for male pattern baldness are only partially accepted, or it's partially successful. And again, this is an area maybe where we will continue to see improvement, because like I said, we haven't been able to really find a cure for this so much. Of our sebaceous glands, also located within the integumentary system. And these are our skin's oil glands, and they are located all over the body with the exception of our palms and the soles of our feet. And these are alveolar glands, and they produce an oily product called sebum. And most of our sebaceous glands are associated with hair follicles. This is kind of what gives your hair like a greasy appearance. So people that have kind of like naturally greasy level, like greasy hair, or their hair easily gets greasy, maybe would have pretty active sebaceous glands. So like, for example, my hair, like if I don't wash it for one day, it gets really greasy very easily. So I probably have pretty active sebaceous glands, where some people have very dry hair, and so maybe they have less active sebaceous glands. So those types of people use maybe more conditioner than somebody like me who already kind of has a greasy level of hair. Let's see, what else? So most sebaceous glands are associated with hair follicles. We know that. Sebum collects dirt. It softens and lubricates the hair and skin, prevents hair from becoming brittle, and keeps the epidermis from cracking. So in the winter months, I don't know if anybody gets this, but these sebaceous glands can vary, depending on location as well. People that have oily faces have high level of sebaceous gland activity in their face. Anybody who gets dry legs, like in the winter, my legs get really dry and cracked, and I have to make sure I put lotion on a lot. That's because the sebaceous glands in that particular area in those particular months of the year are not producing a high amount of this oil that we need. So therefore, we would put lotion on to help soften your legs and to prevent your skin from becoming brittle. Sweat glands, we have two different types of sweat glands, and these are going to allow us to dissipate heat. So this allows us to be contributing to thermal regulation within the epidermis. We have 2.5 million sweat glands distributed all over the body, and we can produce about 500 mils of sweat per day. That's just normal. That doesn't even include exercise levels. You're sweating all the time. We just don't know that because the sweat can be dissipated from your skin surface as quickly as it's put there. So you're sweating onto your skin surface, and the air quickly accepts those water molecules into the air, and so therefore you don't even know that you are sweating. Two types of sweat glands that we have. We have eccrine sweat glands. These are far more numerous in nature. They're located all over the body, and they're more related to exercise. So our eccrine sweat glands are going to be activated during an exercise bout. They're very important for us in terms of thermoregulation, for maintaining our body temperature. And the second type of sweat gland that we have are apocrine sweat glands. These are primarily located in our axillary and genital region, so like in your armpit and your genital area. And they produce a more yellow sweat that's smelly in nature, and these are more related to stress. So, maybe when you go in for a job interview and you feel kind of like your palms are sweaty and you feel like you get a little sweaty because you're nervous, that's because of the activation or the activity level of these apocrine sweat glands. Some of the disorders of the integumentary system include burns. So burns, we've got damage that can be inflicted by heat, electricity, radiation, extreme friction, or harmful chemicals. Our first threat is body fluid loss, which can lead to circulatory shock. Our second threat is infection. Pathogens can easily invade the skin when the skin barrier is destroyed. There are three different levels. We can have a first-degree burn, and this is when only the epidermis is damaged, and this can heal within a few days. A second-degree burn involves injury to the epidermis and part of the dermis. This can regenerate with little to no scarring within 3 to 4 weeks, so the recovery process is significantly longer here. And a third-degree burn consumes the entire skin. The burned area may be white, black, or red, and we would need to use a skin graft in order to recover from this particular thing. So basically, they'll like take skin, which just seems so gross to me. They'll take skin from another area and move it to this area where you've had this third-degree burn, and like use that to recover, or use that to supplement what you've lost. A lot of different types of skin cancers available. I chose basal cell carcinoma as one to make mention of. Skin cancer is the most common cancer in the US, and the good news with this type of cancer, because it is so common, that we cure about 99% of carcinomas or skin cancers. Over 30% of Caucasians in the U.S. develop basal cell carcinoma in their lifetimes. The cells of the stratum basale proliferate, so they reproduce pretty quickly, and this is going to invade downward, so it kind of like moves into the dermis and the hypodermis. Again, what do we do for treatment of this particular type of cancer? We just surgically remove these spots. Squamous cell carcinoma. This arises from the keratinocytes of the stratum spinosum. Again, overall cure rate's very high. We can have a 99% cure rate here. And again, basically what's happening within the stratum spinosum is we're going to have a proliferation or an increase in the production of the number of cells in this particular area. And again, this can cause us some issues, and again, we can surgically remove these cancerous cells and usually have a very, very high success rate. Melanoma originates wherever there's a pigment, but often arises from existing moles. And again, a very common type of skin issue to have. We can apply the ABCDE rule to recognize melanoma. Again, if you have any like moles or large freckles, it's sometimes recommended that you get them checked out or get them checked out on a regular basis. But you should, in terms of prevention or early detection, we should definitely keep checking on them. I know I have a mole that the doctor told me I need to just kind of keep my eye on and check, about once a month for these particular things. So the A is asymmetry. If the mole is asymmetric in nature, that can be a possible risk factor. Border irregularity. So you can see in this picture here, like if one side is smooth and the other side is kind of like bumpy or rigid in nature, we want to keep our eyes on that. Color, particularly if there's a change in color. If we see a change in color of the particular mole, so if it was light brown and now all of a sudden it's very dark brown, that can be something to take a look at. Diameter and elevation, again, we want to keep our eyes on changes. So if it increases in size or if it becomes more poofed up than what it was, maybe it was flat before and now it's very elevated in nature, these are things we want to keep our eyes open on. And again, looking for changes in these particular things is important for us in terms of early detection. Cold sores. This is a very common issue. Lots of people get cold sores, and basically we localize in the nerve cells that supply the skin. Cold sores are common, on your lip. Some people get them like between their lip and their nose. I've seen some people get them like on their forehead. So, the location can be different from person to person. And, some people will continue to get these in the same location, time after time. But basically, again, it localizes in the nerve cells that supply the skin. and they remain dormant until activated by either emotional stress, fever, or UV radiation. So again, those are the main triggers for cold sores. And again, it just is kind of like a little bubble that you get on your lip or wherever you might get them. Psoriasis is an inflammatory condition that's characterized by reddened epidermal papillaries, and this occurs from over-proliferation or an increase in production or overproduction, you could say, of the epidermis, and the pink color is due to widened capillaries in the dermis layer. It's an autoimmune condition that we don't really have a good treatment for, unfortunately.